Hello, in our conversations with Africa's leaders, today we speak to Monde Ndlovu, the Managing Director of the Black Management Forum. This is a South African organization established in 1976 to advocate for the socio-economic transformation of the country. Its primary focus, developing and promoting managerial leadership that reflects South Africa's diverse demographics and aligns with the principles of justice, fairness, and equity. So, what are some of the lessons learned in the South African experience that can be transported to other African countries and indeed BRICS member nations? Monde Ndlovu, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the BRICS Africa channel.
Thank you very much for having us. It's a privilege to be here.
Perhaps we can begin by you telling us what the Black Management Forum core mission and vision is.
Yes, certainly. The Black Management Forum started about 49 years ago, quite a long time ago, but the idea of the BMF extends a bit longer than that. When you look at the cadence of resistance in the 70s, and of course, Black managers at the time, it was unlawful to be called a Black manager. And so part of the resistance in the workplace and understanding that there's very few of us who are Black managers in corporate at the time, we needed to get together and find common ground and understand the environment that we operate in and how do we support each other during that process. So that is essentially what catapulted the existence of the BMF. And then, of course, then formally, the mandate of the organization is to develop managerial leadership in the country and ensure that there is that quality of leadership that we develop along the way. And as we were talking about the development of managerial leadership, we then also discovered formally that there's a problem with the environment in which this leadership is operating in. And hence, we need to do something about that as well. We can't just gather together, mentor, exchange ideas. How do we develop? How do we have upward mobility during the darkest times? Because the latter years of apartheid were probably the most difficult. Just like they say, the last few moments of a dying horse, its kicks are quite deadly. And so when that began to happen, and at the very same time, we realized that we cannot keep quiet about what's happening in the socio-economic space, socio-political environment in the country. So to articulate political views under the corporate cloak. So some people began to be a little bit confused to say, but it's a management organization, but its utterances sound like, move like almost a political party. And when there was a leadership void in the country in terms of voices speaking up against apartheid, BMF became one of those voices that started to speak up in the mid 80s, moving that way into the 90s. So we recognize that we need to speak up about what's happening, not only speak up, but bring forth our ideas as to what could be the alternative economic structure of the country. At the time, we went on an offensive as well. Went and saw banned political parties in exile, so the ANC and others during that period as well, to say we now thinking this way as the BMF, this environment needs to change so that even our mandate of developing and seeing management, Black people in management and upward mobility and controlling management in the country, in the economy, it cannot happen without the environment fundamentally changing. And so then we added the advocacy aspect, that we are beginning to advocate for the change. And some great ideas came to the fore that the BMF, has been proud to be part of, from your affirmative action blueprint to other, key pieces of legislation and inputs to your Triple BE Act, etc., amongst others as well, precisely because, yes, we are managers and leaders, but at the same time, we need to articulate views, articulate what needs to change publicly and we use the organization to drive those ideas, to drive the thinking. Yes, we are professionals, but we're professionals who think deeply about the crises of the country. And here are our views and ideas on how the terrain can shift and change, and who must be, which people must be also influenced at the same time. So we had very close to government, became very close to government. Some of our leaders became even advisors over the years to different presidents, from President Mandela to President Beki's administrations. And because of the brilliance of the leaders that we had in participating, even at that level, to bring ideas, bring forth ideas right across the political landscape as well. So the history of the BMF is very, very rich.
And one of those leaders was your father. And I just wonder the battles that he fought early in the BMF journey, and to leaders like you now who've carried the torch. Have you been able to do that which you had hoped to in terms of changing the demographic of leadership in South Africa?
I think that to be fair, is that the amount of transformational work that we all need to embark on as a country, to a certain extent, there's been a slight undermining of how much it will really take to change, whether it's patterns of ownership, whether it be upward mobility in management and the development thereof, whether it be the educational system, which we still have issues with till today. Are we creating enough engineers who will then in future be those involved in infrastructure development? We see our infrastructure starting to fall apart a little bit, and its management as well. So there's so many nuanced issues that came forth even more clearly post 1994. And of course, when you bring in the emotive texture of the time, that democracy is upon us and the hope of a better life, it's just almost palpable, so to speak. But post that, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98 to around 2000s or so, beginning to see that euphoria begin to wear off because of the reality of the situation, of what still needs to be done in order for transformation to kick in into different gears. And that's where the issues have been. So the generation that has passed in the organization, they laid the foundation, but it doesn't mean that they did everything. Even they themselves, even into their old age, though you could tell the intensity of the discussion, of conversation on what still needs to happen. They passed away with their bootstraps on, because so committed to seeing a change and in the country, and we're not there, even by a long shot. So as we come into leadership, we are privileged to come into these positions. They don't belong to us; they belong to the country. They belong to the people. They belong to the cause that we stand for, and we're held accountable by it. So as we move this transformation train forward, we must commit to one or two things. I believe in fewer things. Can't change all 10 things because there's too much to do. You must spread the responsibility, but I need to be responsible, take accountability to say, as I've said, what will I try to push in my sphere of influence where I am today, because there's still so much to do. So we're not there by a long shot. At the same time, we must also celebrate the fact that with their input as the foundation layers, as the stalwarts, gave birth to us, which is very, very key. So, the movements that we've seen incorporated in South Africa is precisely because of their work. They put themselves on the line, put their ideas on the line. They lobbied for legislation. They really lobbied and pushed for certain people to get into opportunities in the workplaces that they were in. They would create opportunities and spaces. They would challenge their boards, challenge their excos to drive transformation. And they did that. And we can see there's been a small layer of what we now call the black middle class it would not have happened without their contribution. So we can see that legislation, law that we come up with can actually be implemented and produce something. It has not obviously produced what we'd like in of things, but it has created a layer of Black people in corporate, in the public sector, who have some form of authority and power and a budget and running organizations and departments. It's not obviously at the level that we want, but even there has been a little bit of movement. Whether you also want to analyze BE transactions. There was a study that came out, I think it was 2015 or so, that we had over 300 billion rands of value created through Black economic empowerment. So even with that, you can see some value has been created, but what has then happened, during that period of researched work around just the ownership level of some kind of value that's been created and the trusts, the subsequent trusts that are beneficiaries of, as well, also have beneficiaries, and a lot of those beneficiaries are beneficiaries in education. So it's also funded education, not only given people shares, and people kind of have a narrow view of even the ownership layer of broad-based Black economic empowerment as well. So we've seen some progress even with procurement, and finding its anchor, in Section 217 of the Constitution around preferential procurement. That's a constitutional mandate. So you've got to create a law that deals with preferential procurement. Of course, now there's a procurement bill that has come in, a new procurement bill that has come in, and we've always known that preferential procurement has always been a challenge in terms of its execution, but also government's commitment, to women-owned businesses, etc. So we are seeing these things come through. It's because there has been work that has been done prior. It didn't fall from the sky. So there has been an infrastructure that has been created around transformation, but our duty is to strengthen it, not to weaken it or weaken leadership. At the same time, we should not do that. In fact, we should hold each other to a higher standard than before. And as Professor Wiseman Kuhlu would say, who was our president as well, that we've lost the moral authority on transformation because of our own behavior, not the behavior of others, our own behavior. So we need to gain back that ground, which is part of our challenge in our generation. How do we gain back that ground that transformation must be respected? We've got to respect the process. We've got to respect the work that's been done by our forefathers and foremothers before us. A very important work, laying down the foundations. And it is us to continuously build the structure of transformation, build the structure of development, this commitment, this deep commitment to seeing not just South Africa prosper, but the continent as well.
Transformation then being a core value and mission. I'm curious if some of the principles and the strategies that the BMF has applied over time can be used by other countries on the continent. And whilst in South Africa it may have been a black and white issue, in other parts of the continent, gender, as you've mentioned, is one of those things. And also, dare I say, ethnicity may also be a factor. Can the principles and the strategies that you've applied be used across the continent, you think, to have a more inclusive society?
Yes, that's a great question, because transformation is a principled position. And it's about the betterment of society. And at the same time, that is being unpacked. There's different areas of society. So throughout the continent, the challenges may be slightly different, not necessarily on a race-based space as well, but in other areas as well that need that kind of principled engagement. So of course, the principles that drove and continue to drive the BMF can certainly be adopted in other parts of the continent in trying to narrow down what exactly is challenging in the continent. So we know one of the areas which are a challenge on the continent is also capacity building, capacity related issues on leadership and management, both at a public sector level and also at a private sector level. So the need to continuously build and rebuild skills base. And that, of course, is also informed by how good our analysis is of the future economies and what will create future value for the continent. So we look at the Africa Free Trade agreement as well. We're still trying to really implement it as best as we can, because every country, sorry, is slightly different, is slightly nuanced. But when it comes to issues of management, issues of leadership, which cut right across, there is a form of agreement that we can reach in terms of what does it mean to manage in government, and that can be right across, and being the authority on issues of management and leadership right across. So these principles definitely can, because part of what we've been advocating for is creating structures, management structures, and hence some of the frameworks that we came up with, which was adopted by corporate South Africa in the early 90s and throughout the 90s. So we can come in as the BMF and share how we analyzed the lay of the land and what frameworks we came up with that impacted positively the upward mobility and the development of management capacity as well. So it's definitely a conversation that can further be had, that should be had, that BMF can actually, its principles should be taken, throughout the continent and assist from a management capacity perspective and analyze how best we can further improve capacity building and leadership. Because if we fail at a management level, we may have the political power, but if you don't have the management know-how, it will dilapidate in your hands. And even that is also a principle there as well. If you don't have the capacity, you don't have the managerial know-how, even with the best of intentions that you may have, it might probably crumble in your hands. So that is the challenge that is then on for BMF, ourselves, sister organizations that have also come about throughout history, that we actually should be taking our story of development and advancing Black people specifically, and not just Black people, because beyond the color matter, people must be advanced in any case, because you don't just develop once, you have to continuously develop that capacity and know-how. So that is quite critical, and it is a challenge that we need to take on.
So, South Africa, as a member of the BRICS grouping, plays a critical role, I guess, in fostering global partnerships. Where do you see the BMF positioning itself within this context and able to contribute maybe to South-South cooperation?
Yeah, so it's quite a phenomenal thing that South Africa can lead the G20, and it's quite an exciting time as well. And that story is fitting in we've had, which has been magical. That South Africa really has been a leader, and chief amongst has been the role that the BMF has played behind the scenes in some of the leaders that we see even today at the G20, who are participating in various forms. There's different work streams, etc. I mean, those leaders have come through the BMF, so it may not be overt that the BMF is involved, but through the DNA of the people that are actually there are coming from our ranks. So already we don't have to really shout about the involvement of the BMF, because the people there have come through the ranks of the BMF. They believe in the DNA, the values of the BMF in any case, right across. So you're looking at both. If you look at some of the business leaders that are involved and some of the political leaders actually been impacted by the BMF. So our DNA is already there as well. So that's the first part. The second part is, what role can we really play? Again, is for us to amplify our voice, our perspective behind the scenes as to this area of transformation and this area of management and this particular quality of leader that we have produced throughout the years. So you mentioned my late father, amongst his peers as well. That type of quality leadership that we've all looked up to and continuously to look up to. So amplifying that story, amplifying our presence, that we're still producing leaders today, and those even involved in of G20, etc., and other spheres actually are coming through the hands of the organization. So it is for us really to position ourselves once again within that space that the BMF is still really developing leaders, still really driving that agenda to ensure that we have this managerial leader. We're one of the few organizations actually that collide two concepts that way. Managerial leadership. It's either leadership or management in some cases. And in business school, we are especially at Henley, we separate those concepts in business school. You study them separately. You don't collide them. So we've been colliding them for many years, precisely because you're not just a manager managing, having authority, managing a budget, managing processes, creating processes, policies, etc. You're also a leader that is over and above dealing with people, changing people's perceptions, driving culture and values. And infusing these two is part of the magic of what makes the Black Management Forum what it is, because we are both managers and leaders. So we want the individual to collide internally, to have this internal engagement with themselves, that I'm not just a leader or any kind of leader, I'm also a manager at the same time. So you can't let go of processes and budgets and authority on one side. At the same time, you must have chemistry with people, drive culture, and really transform people outside of management processes. So even if you want to be a specialist, when you come into BMF, you are challenged right there. You're not just a specialist in your field. You're not just any person, but you're a person of value who needs to encompass both of these worlds. And this is what the magic of the BMF brings, that we are not just managers, but not just leaders, but we're developing managerial leadership.
Developing managers. So one of the things that's become quite important on a continent with very young people is developing youth. And you've mentioned women. I wonder if you could share some initiatives perhaps that the BMF is working on to ensure that these groups, women and youth, are not left behind.
So one of the beauties of the organization is the structure of the organization. We, the structure gives you an opportunity, whether you are a woman, student, young professional, an opportunity to lead and be exposed. And hence we then have, provinces that got structures, and then branches as well. So you can pick up your hand and actually actively participate. So the students as well have got their own structure that's going, which is led by them. It's not led by us. So that's part of the beauty of the structure, that students must engage. So if they don't do anything at a branch level, they can't send me an email and say, MD, it's your fault, we're not doing anything. So no. It's your structure. I support what I can with what you want to do. So that's part of the leadership independence that the structure actually affords. That opportunity that you come in, you are leading your peers, which is what's going to happen in the workplace anyway. You're going to lead your peers, you are leading other leaders, which is the challenge. So the structure itself really uniquely, built that way, that you can find yourself as a student leader amongst other leaders. You've got to work together. You've got to have a meeting of minds. You must have a program of action, what you want to do as students in the BMF and students of the BMF. And then they engage my office to say, how can you support this program of action as students? Then I then put my best foot forward as I should, and the best way that I can to support them. If they do not take that opportunity, it is not the organization's fault. We've given the platform. They need to take full advantage of it. So that's one of the beautiful things about the organization. And then we've seen, students to do very beautiful things in the organization, in some of the branches, in some of the community work, that they do. So we create a framework in terms of what they should do, but they can expand that if they want to or not, etc. So even at a branch level within the mother body, can even add portfolios. So we've got the standard MOI, but even within the MOI, you can still add, portfolios within the branches. So they discuss that. If they don't see a need for a particular, it's their prerogative, as long as they stay within the frame. But they can add. So that is a function of them thinking for themselves. On the ground is this opportunity we have. We have this branch. Here are members. This is the mandate of the organization. How do we make sense of it? What do we need to do? What kind of support do we need to drive that? Then that's at that level. At a national level, there are things that we do in the organization, which are directly then my responsibility as well. So the issue of capacity building is definitely one of the areas, and partnering with other institutions for students as well. That number two, we've got a partnership with Duke Corporate Education to develop women, right, women leaders in our membership as well. And of course, when we go out publicly, those who are not our members, one of the prerequisites to participate is that you should be a member. So that's how we also bring new members into the organization. So we've got that program as well. Even the focus on women issues in leadership. So we've got a women empowerment desk whose focus is that. So they've got to deal with that, and they also have got presence across the country as well. So again, same principle with them. What is it that they want to achieve as women leaders in the organization, and how do we come in and support that and not be too prescriptive for them, or also proscribe as well, but within a particular framework. So those are just some of the things that are there in the organization. I do have a summit for students as well annually. So it's their own conference that they do for a weekend. My responsibility to make sure it happens, and getting the necessary support. And it's quite a beautiful thing to watch when you see it unfolding every year. And we're seeing new students who come to the summit as well. So that's a very beautiful thing that apart from any other program that they may be doing at provincial, etc. So the organization is as vibrant as its leaders want to be. And I've got a blueprint that I push nationally, that I need to make sure that specific programs that are there, leadership development, etc. But they also have the leeway to drive their own agenda. Both women in the organization have got that space, and the students as well have got that space. Even the young professionals, by the way, have also got that space to drive that which needs to be driven from their vantage point that needs support within the scope of the mandate of the organization.
And perhaps finally, as a managing director, what's your long-term vision for the BMF, and how do you plan to advance this mission in the coming years?
I think, my brother, my vision really is no different to what the organization is about. Simplifying its understanding, because we'll keep getting new members. So we have to keep simplifying who we are, what we are about, and most importantly, what we are not. Because there are organizations out there that struggle to say, what are you not? And so, in other words, there's certain things that we can't do, there's certain things that we are not. It must be clear. So, yes, what we are, but very simply what we are not as well, so that people are not confused about that as well. So, really, for me, it's just to put on my own brick on the foundation that's been laid already, not to dismantle it, but to put my brick there, and be happy with a small contribution in reviewing and ensuring that the mandate is understood, in that we understand our responsibility going forward, and really driving what we say we've been saying to South Africa since inception, that we want to see a certain quality of leader in South Africa through the lens of the BMF. These managers who are also leaders, and these leaders who are also managers. And so my wishes fall within what the organization is about and being held accountable by that cause, the cause, a just cause to see a South Africa transform completely and become globally competitive by the quality of leadership that we produce. And for me, seeing the organization produce even more of these in my tenure, I would be a very, very happy person. But most importantly, am I that quality leader who believes in the vision of the organization? And am I conducting myself in accordance to those expectations? And that's what I hold myself accountable to. It's what I'll hold myself accountable to. I'll leave the rest to other colleagues to define whether this leader stood by his word and his commitment to the values and principles of the organization, and did he really make an impact long after he's gone? That is a conversation that does not involve me, but involves those who will reflect in future as to how I have performed.
Monde, Lot Ndlovu, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for sharing your thoughts, insights, and your vision for the BMF right here on the BRICS Africa channel.
Thank you very much, my brother. Thank you for having us.